Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 8 of the xAPI cohort. We're going to be talking about how to prioritize ethical use of learning data. And our speaker today is Aaron Silvers. But before we get started, I just have a few things to share with you. So let me advance that. So if you don't know, next week is DevLearn, where learning comes to life. Our registration closes this Friday, so tomorrow. So if you're still thinking about coming, we still have registration open for you. I am going to go ahead and drop a link after I'm done talking, and you can go ahead and go to DevLearn. And we are going to have our xAPI party. It's on December 1st. It's going to happen from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And we want you to share your work. So if you would, submit your work. And I'm going to drop a link in chat, and you can submit your work and be part of our xAPI party. It is the culmination of the cohort, and we really hope you can be part of it. For those of you who are perhaps not members of the Learning Guild, we invite you to join us and become a member. Membership is free, and you do get all kinds of different things. We have publications, we have discounts on events, we have other online events, we have webinars, and all kinds of things that you can be a part of. It's a way you can advance your work and your practice by picking up all kinds of wonderful tidbits and information from industry experts. We hope you can join now, and I will put that in chat. And here we are with Aaron Silvers. Now, Aaron looks a little differently, but I assure you that is indeed Aaron. And this is week 8. How to prioritize ethical use of learning data. He is the manager of learning and learning analytics architect. And with that, I'm going to just read his short bio. Aaron E. Silvers helps teams achieve real world strategies for high compliance, high accountability concerns. A common theme throughout his 20-plus year career is an optimistic embrace of talent, emerging technology, and entrepreneurialism that charts learning and development paths toward measurable outcomes that scale. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and turn things over to Aaron.
Thank
And
you.
where Aaron is ready, he's going to go ahead and share his screen. And I'll be in the background. I'm going to turn my camera off, but if you have any kinds of concerns or anything, just type to me in chat, and I'll drop those links that I talked about.
Thank you very much. And hi, everybody. It's real, I'm humbled to be asked to talk to you all about this topic. I'm going to talk about how I prioritize the ethical use of learning data. And I want to make sure that we're constraining this conversation to the focus of our activities assumes the people on this call in this part of this webinar. If you're hearing from me, I'm talking specifically about learning data regarding adults in workforce development context. That means workforce training, skill development, that sort of thing. You're talking about professionals and professional context. We're not talking about higher educational context that has defined laws that that govern this kind of stuff. We're not talking about K-12 learning analytics. I just want to make sure that we're all really clear on the same page. Cool? I'm not looking at the screen, but I'm assuming that everybody's nodding their head that that's cool. All right. So with that, let's first, we need to have a model of what we're talking about. And I think that it helps to have a framework, a picture in mind. And I'm going to pull together, like understanding the long-term impacts of xAPI data requires us understanding just generally the direction that companies and organizations go and the reasons why they go in them in terms of the ascendancy of how they do analytics. I'm going to talk about that really quickly just in terms of like a value versus difficulty matrix. And that, it's sort of value in terms of like how much it costs you, and also what you get out of that in return, and difficulty in terms of just like, again, that cost, but also just the complexity, the number of people involved, the number of skill sets involved, the number of processes that need to be changed or impacted to do deeper analytics, right? And this is basically along this line. You can think about things in terms of like we're either doing things that give us hindsight, we're based on that, then we can do things that give us insight to drive things that give us foresight. All right. That happens with a breakdown of 4 different types of analytics that Gartner describes in their taxonomy. They talk about descriptive analytics, which is generally talks about what happened. We talk about diagnostic analytics, why did it happen? We talk about predictive analytics, what will happen. And we talk about prescriptive analytics, what makes it happen. Okay. And I know that I'm going really fast, but I am going to revisit these concepts again and again. So we'll have time to talk and kind of chew the fat on this stuff, right? One modification to the Gartner model that I would make is in kind of the learning analytics terms, or more just general terms of what we're talking about. One portion of this that really focuses on hindsight is really driven by metrics, right? Metrics are, we can get into definitions of what metrics are, we will. But later we get into analytics, right? Which is, why did it happen? Okay. So now we're not just keeping an account or a log of what happened. Now we're talking about, adding more contextual information that rounds out why it happened as we are capturing whatever it is that we're capturing, right? The precipice of those questions that we're answering with data is what ends up driving machine learning and artificial intelligence, all right? It's not like people start doing stuff brand new when it's time to do machine learning. What they're doing is making new reads of data that you've already collected. So in an xAPI context, we've all been doing for 10 years, I did this, all right? That does a really good job of, if you can answer with an act or a verb, an object, you can describe generally what's happened, right? If you're adding context and results and attachments and more, now we can answer deeper and deeper questions, or more valuable questions to the organization. But it requires more of us, more data, more inputs, more feedback, more processes, more quality processes, right? And the real challenge is that at the very beginning of this graph, tiny bad decisions can have exponentially bad results. Okay. I want to give you, I want you to try and keep that combination of information in mind as we go through this presentation today. So given the context of adult learners and workforce development, this presentation today, what I'm going to do for you all today is try and model very quickly a life cycle of an xAPI statement to understand the potential long-term impacts, looking at that kind of model in a more real world example, right? On the impacts that data has on real people. I want to curate relevant ethical challenges related to using learning data from a corpus of research literature that's specifically about the ethics of learning analytics, right? Believe it or not, there's a ton of this information out there. I'm not inventing anything here. What I'm lucky enough to, I think, find is that the policies and the ethicists are way ahead of the technology, at least in terms of technology adoption. And that presents a nice opportunity to do things, start off on the right feet, right? And thirdly, what I want to do is impart the need to continuously train the capacity you have for empathy, because it strengthens your inquiry skills, and through that, it prioritizes your ethical use. Okay. This is a lot of different things to try and address in one presentation. I was really excited for the challenge. I hope this works. So let's start with thinking about prioritizing ethical use of learning data, um, with the notion that a professional that works with xAPI must be able to describe and model, in some degree, what's going to happen with the data. Here's this picture again, okay? Now let me throw you a real world example that's in development right now, and it's open, so it's citable. Y'all can take a look at it. You can start making some of these connections yourselves as an offline activity. The US Department of Defense has an enterprise digital learning modernization strategy, okay? The kinds of things that they're laid out very high level here in Gartner have real world analogs, all right, um, in here. So, for example, what we do, the data that we feed through xAPI, it goes into alert at LRS, all right? It's collected through any number one of different things, but it's all streaming data and it's all going into learning records, all right? That's your metrics. That's what that is, okay? When we start from there, those learner records are accessing information from an experience index, things that are cataloged like a curriculum, right? It's pulling from competencies that anchor the activity for that learning record in some context that as an enterprise they understand. And that is coming fed through all sorts of different standards organizations, right? That gets us into our analytics because it helps us anchor what happened in a context that is unbounded by the learning activity itself. So we're getting to look outside of the very one little box that we have. Okay. When we start talking about looking then at their learning technology warehouse and their different registries that they're trying to go and the Kafka streams, what they're trying to all really do eventually is solve the problem of if there's an emergency, if there's a need, how do I know who the right person is for the job? And what is their ability and where can we get them? And how do we get them there? It's a human capital supply chain problem. This is enterprise level stuff. Okay. It goes beyond the bounds of what we've been doing as instructional designers or content developers in e-learning context, but we have to understand how our data is going to be used in order to make good decisions about it. Because the challenge here is that, as one of my favorite ethicists online said last night, it was literally last night, the only good news here is for fans of mythology. You get to Cassandra and Sisyphus at the same time. A tiny bad decision can have exponentially deadly results, but a tiny kind decision can have exponentially beneficial results. And that can happen in the same time. And so what I'm going to try and do now is make you aware of some of the opportunities and challenges as our xAPI data matures through an organization in its use and how it might be used. And for us to start reckoning what our part to play is in things that happen or seem to happen outside of our control. The irony is the things that happen downstream are completely shaped by those of us who are shaping the data today. That's a weird twist to how scale works, but this is how it works. So these are the challenges and the opportunities. A professional working with xAPI must be able to demonstrate evidence for the design and architectural choices that they make, including referencing peer-reviewed research that supports and strengthens the effort. This betters our practice. Speaking of bettering our practice, I'm going to cite Stephen Downes a lot. Stephen Downes, who has been ahead of all sorts of ethical and person-oriented, human-oriented challenges to e-learning for over 30 years. Also, the baddest ass mustache and hair in all the learning industry. Anyway, he gave a talk about 2 years ago, and he broke down the Gartner steps, ascendancy model, and its implications on ethics, in specifically around learning analytics. So when he talks about descriptive analytics, he again describes it as analytics that are focused on description, detection, and reporting mechanisms to query from multiple sources, filter and combine data. All to say that basically xAPI, IMS Calper do similar things in this way. All right, like they do a certain set of jobs here that is used to collect and store that activity data. Right, that supports those supports dashboards, helps learners analyze learning logs, and provides evidence of learning. There's some near-term value from doing xAPI before you get to anything hard, like really hard data-wise. Going up another level, though, diagnostic analytics look more deeply into data in order to detect patterns and trends. Security is a common application. So the checks for plagiarism that you might have in like online class, for example, right? Looks at the recurrence of words. It trains machine learning applications to suss out those keywords and phrases from a sample. And then automated checks against different databases in a complicated but consistent and verifiable series of processes. So this is not easy, but like predictable and governable. Okay. Assessing competencies from actual performance data sourced outside the learning context. Right. So now actually using actual job data. Uses technologies like analytics-based assessment of personal portfolios and design profession contexts, and or using data-driven skills assessment in the workplace, which is a common application for this. Okay. When we start talking about predictive analytics, it's now starting to build on data that we've tracked and now applying some form of some algorithm to it automatically in order to where we are teaching software as people our kind of go-to policies for if you see a pattern of things that looks like this, that clearly means something, all right? And it starts looking for patterns that we tell the algorithm and train the algorithm to do, okay? So one example of this is something that I work on, right? It's our transition to practice product. It leverages data from a couple different activity sources, all of which we create in our product, right? But through their different uses, suggest newly graduated nurses in the program who might be at risk of feeling unsupported or a lack of confidence in their professional skills. We know because of a whole body of research on drivers for nurses, for retention challenges in nursing, that 35% of all newly graduated registered nurses have been leaving the profession within the first 2 years based on the fact that they feel unsupported or lack of confidence in professional skills. So we build a product to focus on those things. And then we provide all sorts of engagement mechanisms, not just the formal e-learning stuff we do, but journaling, shift surveys, all right, pulse things, right? We train an algorithm that makes decisions based on not necessarily that any one thing that somebody did, but statistical shifts of significance from one sentiment to another, right? Like precision medicine, such precision learning systems require more variables than just the data from one single activity. That gets you into ideas of learner profiling, learner preferences, learning environments, and the work environment. learning strategies contribute to that data set. All right. Already, this should be bouncing off of you. That seems like tracking a lot of information. That seems like a lot of that seems a little bit pervasive, right? Prescriptive analytics, right, have a popular application for that is recommendation engines. All right, you've seen this content, you've done these activities. Based on these activities, now we're making decisions about what else you should, other things that you would like, other things that you should train on, other things that you should see. Adaptive learning systems, where it's in real time, all right, and then pulling from a library of content to find the right difficulty level or the right assessment item to deliver to you next. All right. These are powered by prescriptive analytics, of which there are various forms. And there's lots of different ways to do adaptive learning. It's a whole other presentation that I've done. I put the link in. You can certainly check that out at a later date. Downs goes as far as to define two more forms of analytics beyond that, which I've seen in some, at least, practice, if not at least prototyping over the last couple of years. All right. Using analytics to create new analytics. So training machine learning on the actual vector of your questions themselves and how you choose to answer them to generate new questions to ask. All right. An example of this is like using data from assessment items to generate new assessment items for a learner. When AI or machine learning, because it gets really fuzzy when you start talking about what's one versus the other, right? When you are training a system to do that, it's going to look at competencies that are linked. It's going to look at the difficulty level of the assessment items. It's going to look at previous attempts against sampled assessment items and all the competencies and the difficulties of those things, all right, and the weight potentially of what choice they made if it's multiple choice, because some choices are weighted. Some choices might be worse than others. And the key thing about generative is that it does all of this without a human. It determines what is correct or incorrect, and it delivers that directly to the learner, right? Or it can in some scenarios, right? There are definitely some ethical questions there, right? Deontic analytics gets us into the precog, what ought to happen. So now we use analytics and our questioning and our approach to analytics to mediate the experience. And an example of that is recommenders, bots that enforce explicit media policies, anti-bias detection in writing, some simulators that have bounds and exceptions that have in state that requires you that if you did something here, it's gonna have to impact something else, like something completely disconnected. That's a lot. I want to take a pause right there. Are there questions on the board right now? Because I can't see the screen or anything, but if there are, I'd be happy to answer a few.
Sorry, Erin, it takes me just a minute to get back here. There wasn't any, I don't see any questions coming in, but I do want everyone to post them if they have them. I want to make this comment. Someone did post, okay, if they understand your concepts here. So, like, I'm building a burger. I put the patty on the burner, which is descriptive. I left the patty on for too long, diagnostic, and then the customer is unhappy. That was an example that someone had posted in chat to your chart, so I wanted to share that with you.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Oh, so yeah. Well, here's a question that's come in. Where have you seen the most work in any of these?
I mean, where I've seen the most work is literally predictive analytics, because that's literally what I work on. So, if you're asking me what I've seen the most, that's what I've seen. But that's because there's been so much work already done in descriptive and diagnostic analytics that I myself have also done. That I'm, for the last couple of years, there was, a want and a commercial need, and I had an idea of how to do it, but like, that's where I personally have seen the most work done there.
All right. Anyone else? Oh, another one just came in. Where do you see the most potential today compared to late?
Potential for what? Danger?
So, Amy, if you'd
uh,
let us know. I'm asking for clarification, so hopefully,
yeah,
potential for work done in any of these areas.
I, I'll come back to that, but
Okay.
nature of what work is the question. So,
I think she
uh,
means if whether it's predictive or not. I perhaps maybe she'll tell us. She posts it in.
right, because I know
Well,
I'm
well,
presenting in one. I'm presenting with one context, but that may not be what she's asking about. So I
right.
want to
So while
be
we're waiting for
mindful of
that,
that.
we'll move
Yeah,
on.
we'll move on.
Thanks.
So, uh, with all of that descriptive information around like the ascendancy, the different types and different opportunities and potential, risks even uh, with learning analytics, here's an overview of the ethical challenges with it. One, AI is brittle. Uh, when the data are limited or unrepresentative, it can fail to respond to contextual factors like or outlier events. It can contain and replicate errors. So, like if you have an error early on, that error never goes away until you find it, right? And if you find it by the time that you're doing machine learning, it's too late, right? So you can contain and replicate errors. It can be unreliable and misrepresented or even defrauded. In the case of learning analytics, the results can influence bad pedagogy, untrustworthy recommendations, or perhaps worst of all, nothing at all. You know, like when nothing happens, when nothing is recommended, is that because the system's working or because it's not? Right? These are difficult things to navigate. Errors invite concerns. I mean, we all know this, right? But when you're doing something where it is driven by data, because we can't understand, most of us don't understand, let alone see how the data is collected, let alone what data is collected specifically, right? Research did was what basically said, and I quote, analytics results are always based on the data available and the outputs and predictions obtained may be imperfect or incorrect. We know this, that's a risk. But then questions arise about who is responsible for the consequences of an error, which may include ineffective or misdirected educational interventions, right? So people get upset and take action, but that action doesn't necessarily fix the error, right? Another challenge with errors is that misinterpretations invite questions of validity. So one thing is like, a typo, or we put the score wrong, or this algorithm was just wrong because it was a syntax error, right? But we can misinterpret things. That's a mistake. That's an error too, right? And those invite questions of validity across an entire effort. So because analytical engines don't actually know what they're watching, right? At least, especially in upper levels or level of complexity, they may see one thing and interpret it as something else. So, for example, looking someone in the eyes is taken as a sign that they're paying attention. That's how an AI interprets someone looking straight at it. But it might just be the result of a student fooling the system. For example, students being interviewed by an AI are told to raise their laptop to be eye level with the camera, so it appears that they're maintaining eye contact, even though there isn't a human on the other side of the lens. And the result is that the AI misinterprets laptop placement as paying attention. Then there's the challenge of verifiability and replicability, right? If we're doing things that are data driven and they're effective, they should work for more than just one group. And if there are preconditions, that should be known, all right, so that it's easy to replicate. Okay. Reliable data requires foresight and investment. It's distinguished from suspicion, rumor, gossip, or other unreliable evidence. And a reliable system of analytics, and this is in survey results and research done in terms of other people who've done studies, survey the literature, right? The reliable system of analytics must be consistent. An AI experiment ought to exhibit the same behavior when repeated under the same conditions and provide sufficient detail about its operations so that it can be validated. The reliability of models and algorithms used in analytics concerns the capacity of those models to avoid failure or malfunction. And that can be because edge cases, that can be because of malicious intentions, all right? The vulnerabilities have to be identified, and the technical solutions have to be implemented to make sure that autonomous systems will not fail or be manipulated. And then there's here a huge risk for our ethical use of learning data is our own bias, right? Let alone biases of others and organizational biases, right? So in one sense, biases one specific way, analytics could be an error or unreliable. The challenge is that the outcome of bias is reflected in misrepresentation and prejudice. And so the problem of bias pervades analytics. It may be, we may have bias in the data, right? Like just how we're even modeling the data requires assumptions on someone's part. I've designed several profiles that are in use, by, I guess, at least more than one person in the world. But, I've, as much as I do to shore up against my own biases, like that is an intentional thing that has to be done, because bias could be just in how the data is modeled. It could be in how we choose to collect the data. It could be in how we manage the data and our assumptions about rolling things up. It could be in our analysis, not even necessarily just in the reports that we create, but how people misinterpret what we're giving them, right? And it all can also then, which gets us into the application of the analysis, right? There's lots of challenges. So with all of that, let's talk about how a professional working with xAPI furthers their inquiry skills and their ethical practice by continuing building their muscles for empathy, because it's really the only crutch and tool we have to guard against this for the downstream, because the garbage in is the garbage out, but the good in is the amazing out. I'm going to quote a couple of people here. So I'm sure people are familiar with Brene Brown. She talks about, when it comes to our sense of love, belonging, and worthiness, we are most radically shaped by our families of origin. What we hear, what we are told, and perhaps most importantly, how we observe our parents engaging with the world. Now, there's a challenge with this, and I would say it's particularly among folks who grew up in, kind of like more dominant culture in the U.S., right? If you aren't underrepresented, chances are your family didn't do a lot of perspective taking. And I'm not saying that as a generality, as like, oh, everybody's like that. No, I'm just saying, like, it's difficult to understand the walk a mile in somebody else's shoes if you never see the other people, if you just don't run into other people, right? So it's a challenge. It's a challenge for a lot of people, particularly growing up in a particular time. I don't think that's necessarily as true for kids today, but I definitely know that there are some challenges based on where you grew up, how you grew up. So one exercise that we all can do, you don't have to do right now, right? But this is here is a simple example of something that I've done actively to really expand like my sense of empathy, all right? Which is trying to think about your impact and your reach and the amount of, I guess, feel and care that you can try and generate within yourself for yourself and other people. And by exercising that further and further repeatedly to try and feel empathy for not just the people that you like and know, but the people that you don't, the people you don't agree with, the people who make it hard, all right? Um, people that you like like that, trying to understand that level of empathy and keep the cool allows us to start asking like more interesting questions. Okay. The Oregon Primary Care Association came up with an approach they call empathic inquiry, right? They talk about it that it's from a place of non-judgmental curiosity and understanding, right? This came through motivational interviewing and trauma-informed care approaches, along with input from patients and other stakeholders. And this is all for trying to figure out like needs-based care, which is a difficult set of conversations to navigate. So the interviewing process, it's not just a form, it's an interview, it's how you interview, right? It's an entire design. It's intended to facilitate collaboration and emotional support for both patients and health center staff through the social needs screening process, right? So through the process of trying to do the thing itself, builds the relationship between health center staff and patient, right? It evoke it evokes patient priorities related to social determinants of health needs, right? So one good here does a greater amount of good downstream because getting these needs down now allows you to do earlier interventions and get people the help they need so that they don't have emergencies, they don't have long-standing illnesses, so that they, whatever. But key to this is that integrating that patient feedback into subsequent care planning and delivery processes. Like they're using one entry point to build a relationship and come up with an engagement plan that continues and grows the relationship, right? This leads us to having to do things then like question storming, right? As an activity I've written about. I'll put the link in as well, all right? You start with a simple, a common question that you'll get when you start doing when you start trying to do learning analytics is that the stakeholder is going to want to know how long does it take to get through an activity, and that seems like a really simple question, but like that question can turn into several other questions, right? Does an activity mean a learning activity, like a survey? All right. What does it mean to get through an activity specifically? Does that mean that you want to go all the way to the last frame of linear content? You need to have seen all the content, must you pass like having empathy and trying to put yourself in the shoes of how long does it take to get through an activity? Okay, I'm a learner, I'm getting through an activity. What does that mean? Right? That's what I'm asking y'all to do. Okay. Rebecca Ferguson, like Stephen Downes, writes a lot about learning analytics and ethics. She has some pretty straightforward advice for how to deal with these challenges, right? Which is basically this: use data and analytics whenever they can contribute to learner success, ensuring that the analytics take into account all that is known about the learning and teaching. Okay. Equip learners and educators with data literacy skills so they are sufficiently informed to give or withhold consent to use the data analytics. It doesn't necessarily apply to us as an adult learning, because most people don't have a choice in that regard. But the more agency we can give in the process, in the sausage making, the better the better off we are in terms of getting this right. Taking a proactive approach to safeguarding an increasingly data-driven society, identifying potential risks, and taking action to limit them. Not just saying, hey, that's a risk, but actively stepping up and doing something about it, including saying no to work. Let that sink in. The level of work that we do has the potential to do enough harm that you may have to actually say no to things, right? Which is, again, that empathy muscle comes from, will give you the strength to do that. But I understand that it's tough to say no. Not all of us feel empowered to do it. Okay. We need to increase the understanding of the value and ownership and control of data. All right. I would guess that for some of you, seeing the Gartner model, for example, that might be the first time you've seen that. This might be the most in-depth conversation you've ever had. I may also be talking about a bunch of stuff you've already known for a really long time. I get that. This is a presentation. Right. The point is, though, that like we, if I could just recap and sum up for us as my time is running short. Ethical use starts with you, right? A tiny bad decision can have exponentially deadly results, but a tiny kind decision can have exponentially beneficial results. Learning analytics is more than xAPI. You're going to have to work with xAPI, you have to be able to describe and model what's going to happen with that data. All right. Ethical business practice is smart learning business. All right. A professional working with xAPI should be able to demonstrate the evidence for your choices. All right. Including peer-reviewed research. It only is going to strengthen the effort. All right. And empathy drives our future practice. All right. A professional working with xAPI furthers their inquiry skills and ethical practice by continuously building their muscles for empathy. Right. You will ask better questions if you are stronger in being empathetic. Just that's a correlation. And that's me with stubble that I usually have, actually. And you can feel free to contact me for working things, and I'm also available for consulting if when needed. And then I have a bunch of sources that I'll include as well, so that you can go and compare all the things I've done. That's all I have. Are there any questions?
There are some questions, so I'm going to go ahead and go over those. Have there been any issues so far with xAPI professionals and the data that the work generates and GDPR and other similar data privacy regulations?
Well, I don't know about any professionals. I can tell you from my experience, at least working at Elsevier, GDPR spans, for most companies and enterprises, it spans well beyond like us, right? It's an enterprise. They have enterprise policies for that, and to that end, we chose tools that helped us, comply with those things pretty easily. And for the most part, with GDPR, it's the kind of like the right to be forgotten. So you need to be able to account for the data that you have about a person, and you need to be able to either, wipe it from the system, de-anonymize it, or basically take them out of the system, which, because of the choices that we made, the engineering choices and architectural choices, it's not been a real concern. I think that if you're working in an environment, let's put it this way, if you're a small company trying to do this work, I'm not saying it's hard, but it's definitely like the people involved are going to be doing more depending on how big you have to scale. For a company like Elsevier and other publishers and Thomson Reuters and the like, they have staffs that deal with that kind of stuff all the way through, and most of your enterprise organizations do that too, so it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, great. And then another question, in industries or regions where legislation does not define what is or is not ethical, what are some best practices to determine how ethical is defined?
I'm literally giving you those resources. That is it.
There you go. All right. Any other questions coming along? I don't see any, and we have come to the end of our time. Thank you so much, Aaron. That
No
was
problem.
great. We've learned a little bit more about some ethics and xAPI, and we appreciate the time that you've spent on your presentation. And we appreciate everyone else's time in joining us today. So we'll see you at the next session next week. And don't forget, I think I dropped in here. Tomorrow's the last day to register for DevLearn. We hope to see you there.